This morning, I'm going to ask you to do something a little different because I'm going to try something a little different. You want to be bold this morning? We'll try something a little different this morning? We're going to follow the Spirit this morning. So we're going to look at this message maybe in a different way, maybe even with a little different interpretation than you might have seen this message before. Perhaps, maybe not. But I'm going to ask you to go with your heart this morning, to go into this message with your heart this morning. Nothing wrong with our mind, right? God gives us intellect, reason. We believe in reason as Methodists. But I believe change occurs in our heart, through our heart. That's why Jesus says, change our hearts. And Jesus changes our hearts. So I'm going to ask you to walk and experience this message through the life, through the eyes of the woman in the story. Will you do that with me this morning? Will you do that? I was there when Jesus came. I was there when Jesus arrived. I was not that far away on the outside of the city. I knew I had to be there. I knew I had to be touched by Jesus because only He could save me. Only He could heal me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you a little about me so you know and understand me and what was going on. You see, I believed in God most of my life. I'm a Jew. I was raised up in the Jewish tradition. I went to synagogue. I said the prayers. I did everything a Jewish person who believes in God is supposed to do. And then 12 years ago, my life took a drastic turn. I started bleeding. And bleeding, and it just wouldn't stop. And I went to every doctor that I could. I spent as much money as I could trying to get help, and no doctor could fix me. So then I went to every person who said they had the power to heal me. Some I probably shouldn't have gone to. And they couldn't help me either. And as this condition continued, I was weakened, and I was hurt, and I was in pain every single moment of my life. And then, to make matters worse, I became an outcast. You see, according to the Jewish law, God's people could not touch me or have contact with me because they could not, or we cannot have contact with blood. They became unclean. I was unclean because of my condition. So people I grew up with, my neighbors, my friends, even my own family members, avoided me, abandoned me, refused to interact with me. And I had no choice but to go on the outside of my community, outside of the gates of the city. And I was reduced to begging every day for scraps of food to survive because I had used all my money and resources trying to get help. I didn't recognize who I was any longer. And when people came by, people that knew me, people that I hung out with every day, even some of my aunts and uncles and relatives to get to the marketplace and other places for goods, they pretended they didn't know who I was. They walked right past me. And each and every day I became more bitter. I became more angry. I became more hurt. I became a person who was more and more disconnected. I was angry at God. I was angry at everyone. I was a real outcast. Until one day, I heard Jesus. He was talking about God. And I went there and I made sure I was covered up so no one would know who I was, all the way in the back, in the distance. But I could hear Him speaking. And it was literally God speaking to me. And He was saying how Jesus came for people like me, outcasts. So we could have a relationship with God. A real personal relationship with God, not just go through the motions. How He had come to heal us and give us a new life. so we could be restored not only to God, but to other people. And I don't know if I understood it all, but there was something about the way he said and how he said it when he looked into our eyes that I believed in a different way. So when I heard he was coming to Galilee, I knew I had to get there. I knew I had to go there because he was the only person who could heal me and literally change my life. So that day, I arrived. And there was a crowd of people. It was so big you wouldn't believe it. And Jesus was in the middle of that crowd. They were like a bunch of sardines, and he was in the middle pressed against them. They were barely able to move as they were around him. And so I knew I had to get to him. I knew how to find a way through those obstacles and people to get to him. So I covered my face with that veil so no one would know who I was, trying to blend in with that crowd. And it was actually kind of easy because they were focused on Jesus. And I tried to push through elbows and shoulders, trying to keep me from doing so, people pushing me, but I continued to push through. And I tried to do so very quietly and secretly, because I knew if I could just touch Jesus, that everything would be new and I would be healed. So I came to Jesus. Finally, I got to him from behind him. And I reached out. And I just barely tried to get a glance so he would not feel me touching him. And as I touched him, I felt his calf and him touching me and the edge of his cloak. And then something amazing happened. At that very second, my bleeding stopped. It stopped. But something much more happened also at that moment. My shame, my humiliation, my anger, my resentment, my pride, everything that was toxic in me left me at that moment. And in that moment that seemed to go forever, I felt something I had never felt before. I was at peace. And that peace was interrupted by Jesus saying, "Who touched me?" And then people all around me saying, "Not me, not me, not me, not me." Followed by Peter saying, "Master, everybody's touching you. You're surrounded by a crowd that's all around you." And Jesus saying, "No, someone touched me in a different way. I felt my power going out to heal someone here." And then I knew I could not remain in the background. I had to confess to Jesus. I had to confess to everyone else here what I had did, what Jesus had done. So I made my way to the front of Jesus, taking that veil off my face, my hands shaking like a leaf. And I was scared. I was afraid of the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees who were there and what they would do and what the people would say. I was scared for my life. But that fear was quickly overcame by my love, my devotion, and my gratitude to Jesus. And I threw myself down at his feet, and I just praised, I worshiped, and I thanked God who was right there touching me. Tears flowing down my face of joy. And I looked, and I looked at everybody there. For the first time in a long time, I looked in their eyes. And I said to them, "Look at me, look at me, look at me. You know who I am. You've walked by me. You've overlooked me. You pretended I wasn't there. I've had this disease for 12 years. Nobody could help me. I tried everything. I spent everything. But I knew I had to get here. And when I touched Jesus, he healed me. He got rid of everything that was holding me back. He made me a new person today. I was touched by God. And then something amazing happened. Something I will never forget. Jesus looked at me. God looked me right in the eyes, into my heart, and he called me his daughter. Can you imagine that? Me, a child of God. And he told me that because of my faith, because of my trust in Jesus, I was completely healed and restored. Free to live in peace with God, with God's people, all people. I was released to touch others. I could touch people. People could touch me. I could have contact with all people because I was healed through the power of God's touch. There are times in our life when we feel discouraged, wounded, troubled, heartbroken, lost, alone. Times when we feel disconnected from God and others. We crave contact, connection. That God sees, hears, understands, cares. Is not removed from us, but is here with us. That's why Jesus came. To show us God is with us, reaching out to us where we are. God is approachable, present here with us through Jesus Christ. You can reach out to Jesus anytime, anywhere, any way. But it takes a step of faith. Trusting in Jesus, not just belief. See, we can believe in God, we can believe in Jesus intellectually, but that doesn't necessarily change things, as this woman's story tells us. There's a difference between trusting Jesus, giving our lives to Jesus, abandoning ourselves to Jesus, moving past our barriers. Well, sometimes those barriers are our minds, our intellect, that stand in the way of God working through our emotions and feelings and heart. Sometimes it's our pride. Sometimes it's our need to be in control or fear of letting go, which is a lot of times what it is. Sometimes it's a fear of trust, of abandonment. Sometimes the barriers are our feelings or lack of feeling of God's presence, that he really is here, he's really with us, he's really working our lives with what's going on in this situation that I'm in, that God really hears and sees and is working, still present in his timing. Or be feelings of anger, frustration, that our prayers feel unanswered, discouragement, resentment, that sometimes we misdirect to others or sometimes we even direct to God. And sometimes those obstacles are obstacles that people place before us. People that maybe misrepresent God at times in our lives. People that hurt us, mistreat us, violate our trust, don't always act like Jesus towards us, even in the church. But we still need to trust Jesus. It still takes a step of faith. Trusting Jesus is over all. That Jesus is still actively present, working in our lives, and in his body, the body of Christ, the church, where we encounter God's healing presence through all of us. As we share our hurts, our wounds, our pain, in our lives with each other, touched by God's grace and forgiveness. See, that is one of our callings as the church. A place where imperfect people, sinners saved by grace, live together, working out our salvation together. A place where people can come and be real, authentic, open, sharing hurts, wounds, things that have happened in our life, and experience and come in contact, touched by God's grace, love, and forgiveness through us. And also a place that they can witness that through the body of Christ, the same way God puts it in the flesh through Jesus Christ. We will hurt each other. We will hurt each other. We will break and violate each other's trust. We will wound each other because we are human, we are imperfect, we are sinners saved by grace. But we need to be secure in our relationship as God's children. That through Jesus Christ, God gives us grace and forgiveness to extend to each other and receive from each other. And what that takes is for me to go to you, my sister, and you, my brother, in a spirit of love, in a spirit of humility, in a spirit of openness and grace and honesty, and saying, when you did this, when you said this is how I felt. I was wounded, I was hurt. And so many times we don't say that, we just express anger or we run away or walk away. I've done it. And with the idea of restoring the relationship. And if I'm on the other side of that equation and you're coming to me, then I am called to respond with the same love, grace, and humility. Not getting my back up like I do and we can do sometimes defensively. But asking God to help me to listen, to hear the pain, the agony, not to worry about being right, but to focus on restoring this relationship, no matter what the cost. John Wesley called that Christian conferencing, coming to the table and coming to a third way, the way of Jesus, which is always about renewal, redemption, and restoration. That is how we receive God's grace, love, and forgiveness. Witness that in the body of Christ, the church. That's how other people experience. And when they do, they are free, we are released, and they are released to touch others, to be connected with others in a real way, not a superficial way, not a facade, but a real life-changing encounter with God's healing presence. Healed through the power of God's touch. There's a movie Velma and I were watching, I think it's about a week ago, When They See Us. Anybody see it on Netflix, have Netflix, When They See Us? Highly recommend it. It's a short-term series about these young people who were in the wrong place at the right time, or however you look at that, in Central Park, and they were accused and unjustly tried and convicted for raping a jogger. And it was big in the press many, many years ago. And they were thrown into prison at a young. One of them was 16 and thrown into adult prison. 14. Thank you, my fact checker. Very young and thrown into adult prison. And you can imagine what that was like, right? And he became bitter, he became angry, even all sorts of things. And there was one moment where he gets a call, and he's summoned to the warden's office, and he's told that the sister that he was so close to died. And he breaks down, and the one guard who's there tries to come to console him. He says, "No, don't come to me. You don't care about me. No one cares about me here." But he grabs him, and he holds on to him, and he touches him. And that boy holds on to him. And what you see over the next few weeks and months is that guard builds a relationship with him. And you see that boy start to change through that touch, through God's touch through this guard. And even afterward, when finally it is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that all these boys did not do what they were accused of, it was a setup. They were just trying to quickly find somebody to pin it on. The community comes around them, with the church comes around them. They are restored to the community because they were all the scarlet letter, or the worst imaginable haven't done this thing through the power of God's touch. That's what we're called to be as the church. Contact, connection, touch with each other, with others. Healed through the power of God's touch. Where do you need God's touch this morning? Where are you wounded? Where are you hurt? Where do you need to be reassured that God is indeed with you and he's working and present in your life? In a few moments, we're going to go to our closing song, and I want to invite you to pray where you are or even come to the altar and pray. I would be honored to pray with you. Where do you need to be restored? Or where do you need to restore somebody else? Maybe there's a broken relationship that you have with someone, perhaps even in this church. Maybe in your family, maybe somewhere else. Take that first step. I know it's hard. I know it's hard. But God gives us the grace. He gives you the grace, the strength to restore that relationship. And also to go and maybe make that first move to restoring that relationship. It can change your life. It can change that person's life. It can literally change this church. With healing. Receive and give healing. Connect and be reconnected through the power of God's touch.